All right, we're going to be going over the document analysis of the two documents that you have for two different reactions to the Stamp Act. The first one being from an individual that identifies himself as BW. We see this from our individual who identifies himself as such only in this public letter that appeared in the Boston Gazette and Country Journal. This is an initial colonial newspaper in 1765. Now, what this tells us is that this, for our point of view, when we go to write that down for point of view, and this is what we will annotate for point of view, is that BW is a colonist but otherwise is anonymous. Now, he addresses it to the inhabitants of the province of Massachusetts Bay. But I would caution to not put that as the audience yet. We want to read further. Now, the time period he writes this letter October 1st, 1765. Well, we know that this is around the time period that the Stamp Act had been passed. So when we go to identify our historic context, this is going to be the Stamp Act had been passed. So on your paper, you would put down POV, BW, colonist, anonymous. I will mark that. You would also have HC for historic context. The Stamp Act had been passed. I am annotating as I read to help me figure out what these things are. But when I am grading the document, I am looking for have you identified the point of view? Have you identified the historic context? I'm also going to be looking for have you identified the purpose? Have you identified the audience? And have you identified the significance? So I'm giving you a heads up as to what are the other things that you're going to be writing down, okay? He continues on. My dear countrymen. Well, that choice of word is identifying a patriotism. So that tells us right away that his audience is probably going to be patriotic colonists. Because BW is a colonist, okay? We know he's a colonist, and he's writing to other colonists. So we've identified our audience and our writer. Let's look at what he has to say. It is a standing maxim, rule, of English liberty. So he's using the word liberty, meaning freedom, that no man shall be taxed but with his own consent. That no man shall be taxed but with his own consent. Consent meaning permission. And you shall be very well known, and you shall be very well know we were not in any sober sense represented in Parliament when this tax was imposed. Awake, awake, my countrymen, and defeat those who want to enslave us. Notice how inflammatory these words are. Do not be cowards. You were born in Britain, the land of light, and you were raised in America, the land of liberty. Again, using words that indicate that this is opposing worlds. It is your duty to fight this tax. Future generations will bless your efforts and honor the memory of saviors of their country. I urge you to tell your representatives that you do not support this terrible and burdensome law. Let them know what you think. They should act as guardians of liberty. Again, the word liberty. So that's 1, 2, 3 liberties of their country. I look forward to congratulating you on delivering us from the enemies of truth and liberty. That's 4 liberties. And notice that they're being described as the enemies. Very extreme view. So, what is the author's purpose? What is he trying to achieve? Well, his purpose comes down to he wants to be able to convince, to sway. He wants to convince the readers, colonists, to resist the Stamp Act. That's his whole goal. Because if people can resist this, then they're not going to be in this situation anymore. And our last component will be our significant statement. And when we look at our significant statement, we look at how do we synthesize all this information. When we synthesize this information, we are putting all of this information together. So the synthesized information is colonists felt that they were not represented and were resentful of the Stamp Act. So they resisted. So colonists felt that they were not represented and were resentful of the Stamp Act. So they resisted. Again, to summarize, the point of view is BW is a colonist but otherwise anonymous. The historical context is that the Stamp Act had been passed. The audience, he's addressing this to patriotic colonists. His purpose is to address these issues and convince readers, meaning colonists, to resist the Stamp Act. And the significant statement here is that colonists felt that they were not represented and were resentful of the Stamp Act, so they resisted. These are the pieces that I would like to see on your analysis, on your paper. Let's look at our other document. We will be annotating that one as well. Now this one, we have a specific name. We know that our individual is John Hughes, and he is a stamp tax collector in Philadelphia. So when we go to identify our individual, we get to identify him right away. We get a name, we get his occupation, and because he's a stamp tax collector, this tells us something very specific about him. So John Hughes, stamp tax collector. Notice that it's telling us that he's writing to his superiors in London, which means, is he a colonist or is he instead a British citizen? Well, he's British. And this is important to understand because B.W. was a colonist and saw himself as such, whereas John Hughes considers himself to be a British citizen. And this self-perception is important because this is going to color his opinion. So, John Hughes writes his letter January 13th, 1766. So, for historical context, we're going to bring this in. We know that the Stamp Act has passed. But we also, if we take a look here, we'll know that very quickly within this writing, if we skim a little bit, we can see that John Hughes has had some issues with the fact that people are not following the rules. And so colonists are resisting the Stamp Act. So that is the two parts of our historical context. We can also put in our audience because it tells us specifically who he's writing to, not only with the background information, but also with the addressing of his letter. He specifically addresses it to my lords. So we know that this is to his bosses in London or British officials. So again, the focus here is going to be this is a British perspective for British officials. Let's look at what he has to say. What he has to say includes the colonists have been insulting His Majesty, saying that the Stamp Act was unconstitutional and oppressive. It is apparent to many people here that the Presbyterians are at the head of these riots. Now, if you call something a riot, you are already saying that something is illegal and that it's out of control. They are opposed to kings, and some cry out, "No king but King Jesus." The leaders fill every newspaper with inflammatory pieces. So he describes it as every newspaper, nothing else exists. So that the minds of common people are kept in continual ferment. Kept in continual ferment. If you're kept in continual ferment, it's like saying that you can't keep a straight thought in your head, that you're essentially being driven mad. No one dares write anything that would calm the people down. Doing so would put the writer's life and fortune in danger. Basically, you can't have any opinion other than that against the Stamp Act, according to John Hughes. I am convinced the Presbyterians, so he's got a group that he's convinced are the evildoers, intend nothing less than the throwing off of their allegiance and obedience to His Majesty and forming a republican empire in America and being lords and masters themselves. So he's basically describing a coup, a changing of society in general. I am daily threatened, and verbal messages and anonymous letters with a mob of several thousand people from the Jerseys, New York, and New England. Now, he's getting threats. He's saying like, oh, people are threatening him. I would say he's a tax collector. Maybe people are threatening him because they don't like paying taxes. Also, he keeps saying that the Presbyterians, a religious group, is making people crazy. Maybe he keeps pointing out that this religious group is making people crazy, and he's just making a religious group angry, and that's why he keeps getting threats. He seems like a very unpleasant man. So perhaps the reason why he keeps getting threats has nothing to do with the throwing off of a royal leader and just with the fact that he's not a very nice person. These could be unrelated thoughts, but maybe John Hughes is just not likable, and his being a tax collector makes it worse. But I conclude with praying that the Almighty may secure the allegiance of America to the crown of Britain by destroying the seeds of rebellion. So now he's asking the crown of Britain, so he's asking his bosses here, or at least King George, by destroying the seeds of rebellion, basically these people, and punishing the ringleaders of these riots. He's asking that those that are causing the trouble get punished. And get punished by whom? His bosses, or the King of England. So let's go back to our purpose then. Our purpose that John Hughes has is, and let's isolate our audience. Our purpose then is to, first off, complain about the colonists not paying taxes. But also to ask for England to punish the ringleaders, to punish the ringleaders. Punish the ringleaders. All right? To punish the ringleaders. Okay. Let's look at our summation then, or our significant statement. That's where we synthesize all this information. So we know our person here, John Hughes, he can see that this situation has, the Stamp Act has already passed, colonists are resisting. He's writing to his bosses. He's complaining that the colonists have not been paying the taxes. They're threatening him. And he wants his bosses, or at least England, to come in and punish these ringleaders. What's going on? Well, essentially, colonists have resisted the taxes and are mobilizing in larger groups to form a new nation. So colonists went from being upset to starting to see, this might be the beginning of something. Okay? So again, I'm looking for annotations as well as point of view, audience, historical context, purpose, and your significant statement. So colonists have resisted the taxes and are mobilizing in larger groups to form a new nation. Is our significant statement for that one? You should have both documents completed. And that is our document analysis for the Stamp Act.